Hello, everybody. Welcome to season 2 of Type 2 and You with Meg. It has been such a crazy year. I hope you all are fairly healthy. I hope you all had a summer where you could spend a little more time with your family if you haven't had enough time with your family. And I hope you've taken advantage of opportunities to learn and grow from each other, because I definitely have. So, season 2. Big name coming up right on this episode, and that is Mila Clarke Buckley. You otherwise may know her as the Hangry Woman. So she is a type 2 diabetes patient advocate and digital storyteller who started her food blog, The Hangry Woman, after being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and struggling to find approachable resources to help her manage the chronic condition in 2016. Mila is so well loved. She has so many people who are dedicated to her and her story and can relate to what she's been through. On the flip side of that, whenever you go out and expose yourself to the public, and especially a condition like diabetes, you're also at risk for getting a lot of shame and blame. And Mila is no stranger to that, and we've nicknamed these people diabetes bullies. So I wanted to ask her, what does she do? How does she manage diabetes bullies in her life? And what's her takeaway for you on it? Just a heads up, this episode is a lot longer than I expected. I was thinking of editing a lot of those pieces from my interview with Mila down. But as I was listening back to it, I really love everything that we talked about, what she said. So I'm just going to leave it as it is. And finally, I want to highlight that this podcast season, I actually have the opportunity to have a few podcast episodes that are sponsored. By sponsor, I mean that I am compensated for that podcast episode. Side note, I would do the podcast episode anyway. Doesn't change what I was going to talk about anyway. The sponsorship is not taken lightly. I don't say yes to everybody that's asked for the opportunity to sponsor an episode. And I definitely am not going to change what I am going to say about any kind of product company experience for somebody with diabetes based on a sponsorship. So this week's episode is sponsored by MedIQ. MedIQ is a company that does continuing education for healthcare systems, medical professionals, hospitals, clinics. And they want your voice. They have a survey. The link is in the podcast description. They want to know what your type 2 diabetes experience is like with your healthcare team. And this is going to drive future educational pieces that they do. So there's a potential that you're going to impact a lot of people that live with type 2 diabetes and a lot of medical professionals just by giving your feedback. The survey is anonymous. It takes less than 15 minutes. And if you want to provide an email address, you can. And then you're entered into a drawing for a gift card. I think they're giving away 10 $100 gift cards from the Soma Strategies. All the details are in the podcast description, but please consider doing that. Not only does it support the podcast because it's a sponsorship, but also because it really does give the opportunity for you to use your voice. So this is something I can totally get behind because the whole point of this podcast is to help you fill the gap between your healthcare team and you so that you can live your best, healthiest life with type 2 diabetes. Link in the podcast description. Click on it. Less than 15 minutes. Anonymous. All the details are down there. Thank you, MedIQ, for sponsoring this episode. All right, let's listen in to Mila's experience with diabetes bullies.
Welcome to Type 2 and You with Meg, a diabetes podcast with the tools and guidance you need for your best life with type 2 diabetes. Your host, Megan Munoz, is a Dartmouth-trained health coach and master-prepared certified diabetes educator. She's helped thousands of people turn their diabetes fears, questions, and concerns into hope, confidence, and action. Ready to support your type 2 journey? Here's Meg.
Mila, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I'm super excited to have you.
Me too. Thank you.
So I just want to give you the opportunity to talk about some of the amazing work you do with the Hangry Woman and your new book. It's not as new now that we're in August, but it came out this year, the Food Journal, and some of your advocacy work. So what's going on with you and what do you have up your sleeve?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is the book that I have released this year called the Diabetes Food Journal, and it is just a way for people to be able to track and manage their diabetes in a more holistic way. And I think oftentimes when you have type 2, you're told that diet and exercise are the only things that you need to pay attention into, and you focus in and you hone in on those things, and if you change them, then you're good. Everything will work out. You will be perfectly fine. And in reality, we know that there's so many other factors that can impact our blood sugars, whether it's sleep or stress or being sick and having a cold or any number of things. So I loved looking at it from the holistic view. And although food and exercise are so important, I think also those other factors that I mentioned are just as important to pay attention to. And we know that they affect your blood sugar, and they're things that you should definitely look at. So I created this journal so that it could be just a pocket guide for you about your diabetes management that you can kind of look at and track in every day, and also take to your doctor with the patterns that you're noticing. And I thought that was just one of the best ways to be able to understand what you're going through, but then also to be able to show examples of what's happening with you. I know my doctor loves when I give her examples. If I say, my blood sugar was high yesterday, she's like, okay, and what else? And so it's always great to say, well, I went for a walk after dinner and I had a salad and I put some dried fruit on it, and then I noticed that my blood sugar was high. And then she can kind of pinpoint for me, well, even though you went on a walk, that's a great aspect and that's something that's good to change, but you added dried fruit to your salad, which has concentrated sugar, so that probably contributed back to a spike for you. So it's really good to get that honest feedback and that clarity whenever you have these things written down. And I thought that that was a really great way to help people manage their own diabetes.
That's so true, because the holistic kind of looking at sleep and stress and illness and all these other things are just as important and easily forgotten about. And that communication with your provider is so critical. Where can people pick up the Food Journal book? Where's the best place they could get it?
So it's on Amazon, and that's the easiest and fastest way that you'll get it. But if you head to hangrywoman.com, there is a link there to be able to jump to the Amazon landing page.
And I'll put some links in the podcast description for those too.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so I really wanted you on, first of all, because you're amazing, and second of all, because you have experienced what I call diabetes bullies, or some people call them internet trolls. But I think authenticity and willingness to kind of share your diabetes journey has really drawn a lot of great fans, but it also has drawn some of these negative people. So I kind of wanted to talk about that with you.
Yeah, it's like totally one of my favorite topics because it is so both ridiculous and also just really interesting, the perspectives that people can come from when it comes to the stigma of diabetes and what they think it is and who they think should have it and all of those factors that kind of like play into those comments.
When you say that, what kind of things do you hear people say?
There's a lot. There is sometimes I'll get comments that are like, you're doing your diabetes wrong. Maybe because I posted a photo of like an almond flour cake that I made or some kind of treat or snack. And so somebody's like, you can't do that. You have type 2 diabetes. Like you could never eat that. And if they dug a little deeper, they would see kind of how I will like take a dish that I really like and reimagine it. Like a slice of cake isn't going to be the best thing for my blood sugar, but I can change the ingredients in that slice of cake to make it a little better and to still have that treat that I want. And so people will see that and they think that's all I eat and all I do. And just because I posted a picture of that, like that means that that's the only thing that I'm focusing on and I eat horribly. I've gotten comments like, I am bigger. And so people will say, well, like you deserved type 2 diabetes because obviously look at you. And so comments like that are also both one, hurtful, but two, very untrue because there are people of all shapes and sizes that have type 2 diabetes. And weight is a contributing factor, of course, and excess fat can contribute to insulin resistance, but it's not true of every single person you see that looks that way. And so that's often a comment that I am both taken aback by, but also gives me kind of an opportunity to poke back and educate people and let them know, like, one, that's not okay to say to anyone, but two, it's also not true. And that's kind of a myth when it comes to diabetes. So there are comments like that. People just think that I'm lazy or that I deserved my diabetes because I got it, like solely for that reason.
Yes.
Genetics is often ignored. Like my grandmother and mother both had type 2 diabetes. They both had gestational first, and then it turned into type 2, and I just had type 2. And so people kind of ignore that as well. And they're like, well, you caused it, you did this to yourself. And it's kind of like, well, I also have that really huge link to diabetes. Like it wasn't inevitable for me, but I had a really strong case that eventually I would develop diabetes because of that link in my family history. So there are, I think, lots of things that people assume when they just see that I talk about type 2 diabetes, and they don't take the opportunity or the chance to kind of look at it from the view that I'm looking at it. But it also kind of raises to me just the idea that there is this huge stigma around type 2 diabetes, and that's why people don't want to talk about it. And when I initially started my blog back in 2016, I didn't find anybody who was talking about type 2. And at first, I didn't really wonder why. Like, I wanted that community and I wanted other people to talk to, and I wanted to get to know other people who were my age living with type 2 diabetes, because usually people are older. And so I was like, I need to find someone in their 20s that's actually like doing the same thing that I am. And when I didn't find it, I was like, okay, well, I'll start a blog and just kind of talk about my experience, and maybe somebody else will feel the same way as me and want to talk about it and want to have this community. But then after a couple of years, I realized like, oh, okay, well, nobody's talking about this because of how mean people can be about it. And who wants that? Like, nobody wants to wake up to a mean YouTube comment calling them fat, or an Instagram comment telling them that they're doing diabetes wrong, and everything that they do in their life is not going the right way because they're not doing what you're doing. And it's just really interesting to wake up to some of those things, and then to realize like, oh yeah, okay, well, people kind of hide their type 2 diabetes in some ways. Like, some people do, some people don't, but I think some people do because they're afraid of that judgment and that stigma, and they don't want that attached to them when they're trying their best and just trying to manage diabetes in the best way they know how.
Gosh, you hit the nail on the head with so much of that. I think it's really heartbreaking to see that happen to people. And I've seen it in the clinic setting and the hospital setting, and I've seen it like obviously happen to you a little bit as well. And I just, I just don't know. I guess that's part of the reason I wanted to do this podcast, is to try to break that up a little bit. But it's so ingrained in our thought processes as a society. It's so ingrained in what we do and what we think about that it even infiltrates into the medical world. And so I'm curious to know, have most of the comments been from people with type 2 diabetes, or have most of the comments just been, or do you know, I guess, if the comments are coming from people with type 2?
It's kind of all over the spectrum, I feel like. I don't think that many people with type 2 are saying it, but I think that a lot of people without diabetes or without any connection to diabetes are kind of like the main source of the comments. And then sometimes I get comments from people with type 1, which I also find really interesting because we're kind of in the same boat there. Like, we have different types of diabetes and they're caused in different ways, but a lot of our management styles are similar. And so you kind of think there'd be this bond or this like sense of community there, but there's some judgment that comes, I think, from that space too.
Yes, that's very true. I think some of the stigmas leak over into the world of type 1 diabetes, and I sometimes find in the effort to try to differentiate type 1 and type 2, a lot of people with type 1 will tend to stigmatize people with type 2.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that we, like, some of the things that I hear are like when there's that like differentiation, it's like, I didn't cause my diabetes, or no, I don't have that kind of diabetes, or like things that kind of automatically give someone a perception that type 2 is the bad kind or the negative kind
Yeah.
of diabetes. And so, yeah, I think that there's room to be able to say that. And like, I totally understand somebody with type 1 wanting to kind of like destigmatize themselves, because people with type 2 don't want that stigma either. And so it makes sense for someone to say like, well, I didn't cause my diabetes, or I was born with it, or, this just developed because my pancreas doesn't work. And it's kind of like, yeah, that's true. But there's also a way to say that without kind of like throwing your fellow people with diabetes under the bus.
Yes, very true. Yep. What has your approach been? It sounds like you've almost done some feedback for people on their comments. Is that always true? What kind of things have you done to navigate those bullying type comments?
I used to really take them to heart. I used to like cry to my husband, like, I got this comment today, and I am working so hard on myself, and this makes me just not want to work at all because I feel like nobody's seeing it. So like, why am I doing it? And I used to get really upset by them. And then my husband told me this thing that has like been in the front of my mind ever since. And he was like, if you know that you're working hard and you know that you're doing all the things you possibly can do, and you don't believe those things are true, then they're not true. Like, you can't let someone else who doesn't know you and who has no context of who you are, except for maybe the one video they saw, or the one tweet they saw, or the one recipe they saw on your website. Like, you can't let that get to you. And you're going to get those comments because you put yourself out there, but try not to take them to heart if you know that it's not true of yourself. And that was so helpful to me because I always saw it as a direct reflection on me, when in reality it was kind of a judgment from another person who doesn't see the whole picture. And so I started to, at first I would get like really like upset, and I would just delete them and I would say nothing. And I was like, like this frustrated me to no end, and it would bother me for days. And now I take the opportunity to educate that person, and I give myself one response. And I tell myself that every time. I'm like, you can give one response, just say the one thing to say your piece, and that's it. If they come back and they try to refute you and they try to fight you, don't take the time. It's not worth the time to do that.
I like that. Yes.
That's because you can spend hours like debating someone who doesn't agree with you, and then you've just wasted your own time because you're never going to change their mind. They're never going to change your mind, and that's it. But I just take the stance of like, I'll give them the feedback on their comment that like, no, you're wrong, and this is why, and cite something like whether it's an article or a paper or whatever. And they may not ever read it, but at least I can put that out there for someone and say, this is why like your comment is misguided and you shouldn't say something like this to someone. That's one way I approach it. If it's just like really crass and really mean and just like digging at me for no reason, I just delete it and I block the person and I move on. Because there's sometimes just nothing that you can say or nothing that you can do that is going to make someone stop or go away. And a lot of times, like, that response, like if I give that one response, it will come back as like somebody commenting over and over and over and tweeting me till like no end, until I have to like mute them. And I'm just like, okay,
oh wow,
conversation's done. Like, this is harassment at this point. Stop talking to me. I don't want to talk about it anymore. And so if it gets to that point, or it gets to like, or it's just like really crude and mean and like not it, like I just don't see any opportunity to educate them or anyone else, then I just delete it and I block it and it's out of my life. But I mentioned this on Instagram stories a little while ago, that I keep this folder of mean comments on my desktop. So I'll screenshot them all. And I usually do share them. I'll share them on Instagram because I want people to see that like these happen and these are the perceptions that people have of diabetes and why they're wrong. And then I want to create a really interesting blog post around those. I created one already about like diabetes and body shaming, but I want to do another one kind of about the overall comments that contribute to diabetes stigma. And it includes like some tweet threads and just like different articles that I found about diabetes and then things that people say to me on my own channels, because I think it's really interesting for people to see that it's not isolated. Like if people are saying these things to me because I'm putting myself out there and talking about living with diabetes, but it's how they feel in general about people with diabetes because they wouldn't say it if they didn't feel it. And so I think it's really important for people to know that and to see that we still have so long to go in defeating this perception of what people think people with type 2 diabetes are.
Like you said, that one interaction and being able to help people, shift their mindset. So taking some of those pieces, giving feedback, but then also putting those pieces together and a bigger picture kind of blog post is really helpful. I mean, your body shaming one was an amazing post. I really, really liked that post that you did. And I think it's really important because you're right. You don't know when that person or whoever might read that may come into contact with other people with diabetes. I mean, the chances are really high. And that might shift their approach. It might make them rethink some of those negative kind of connotations they have about type 2 diabetes and maybe be a little bit more sensitive to talking with people about diabetes, or maybe they just realize that it's none of their business and they keep their mouth shut.
Yeah, exactly. I think sometimes that's it too. It's like, if you don't have a connection or you're not dealing with it yourself, like, please do not talk to me. You don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to telling me how to manage my own health. So I think that's like absolutely true too. It's like, sometimes it's just like, where are you coming from? And like, why do you think you have any authority here to like talk to me about this?
Have there been any responses back to you that you felt like, oh, I really made some ground there? Like when I gave feedback to that person or I responded to that person, they were receptive to this. That was a positive experience for both of us.
Yeah, I had mentioned somewhere, it was a tweet thread, I think, and somebody was talking about kind of like it was like about insulin affordability and kind of about how, people with type 1 like really, really belong in this space of asking for affordable insulin. And like, we need more people with type 1 to do this. And so I kind of chimed in, like I hesitated a little bit, but I chimed in and I said, well, you should also think about people with type 2 because that is a majority of the people with diabetes. And there are tons of people with type 2 on insulin who also are craving affordability and who want affordable medication. And in addition, they're also taking oral medications. They're also taking medications for other conditions to kind of like prevent the different comorbidities. And you can't just ignore that. Like, you can't just say that like people with type 1 need to be in this fight deeper, because it's kind of all of us that need to be there. And so it was really cool to get a direct message from them for them to say like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about people with type 2. I just kind of think about type 1 because it's the bubble I'm in. But I just realized that like there are so many allies there too. And I'll think about that, when I talk about this and when I tweet about this, because I want more people to feel included, because you're right, we all need it. And it was really cool to have that conversation and to not, like, I tried my best to like not make it feel like an attack, because it comes off that way, especially in like 280 characters. You have to be short and concise. So everything sounds like you're just like poking at that person. But I was like, I just want them to know that they have so many people who want the same thing and who are there right with them. Like, we just want to be included and we just want to be asked to be a part of the conversation. So that was really cool. And then I think that conversation led to me getting to kind of like write like an article about insulin for all and about how people with type 2 diabetes should be included in the movement because we're also affected. And so that was really cool to kind of like come out of that like full circle, just like thinking about responding to a tweet and then actually doing it and then something kind of changing because of it.
Yeah, and just the community feel had to have been nice that all of a sudden there's a broader community and there's a focused vision, and that's got to be a really great feeling. So well done, Mila.
Thank you.
We're kind of talking about diabetes bullying for people that put themselves out there like you, but have you experienced it within friend groups or family? Sometimes we call this diabetes policing. Has that happened to you as well on a personal level?
I'm really lucky because my family has been like dealing with diabetes for so long that like people are pretty tactful. And even in my friends groups, like at first it was really cute because I told them all like, okay, well, I have diabetes. So like going out at night is going to be different. I may not be able to go with you guys on a late night pizza run. Or if I do, like, don't mind me if I don't eat something. Like I want you to have fun and I want to be there with you. I just have to change my habits. And so my friends would have this really like cute reaction, like they would, I hate the question, can you eat that? But they would always ask like, is it okay if we order this? Or is it okay if we have this? And I was like, you can do whatever you want. I'm going to make the choices that work best for me. And so it was nice to like see them learn along the way and to ask questions that came from a place of caring and just kind of wanting to understand so that they didn't offend me or they didn't feel like I was missing out or they were leaving me out. And so that was really special for me because it was hard to tell them like, okay, well, we're in our 20s and I know we all want to have fun, but I am, going to make some different choices than all of you make. And it's okay. Just, you can ignore me. I'll be there and I'm still going to be having fun, but it's going to be a little different for me. And then I talked a little bit about with my family, but they have been dealing with diabetes for so long with my mom and my grandma that, people don't really ask those like, can you eat that questions? Or, nobody's like looking at my plate at Thanksgiving, like, it's too many carbs there or anything like that. And then I married. So my in-laws also, I was diagnosed with diabetes, right before I got married. And so my in-laws, or actually right after I got married. So my in-laws were just super sweet. And my mother-in-law is always asking me like, what can I get you to drink? Like aside from like, cause we're, in Texas, so there's like sweet tea and lemonade. And so she's like, do you want like a plain iced tea? Do you want green tea? Do you just want water? Like what kind of wine would you like? What kinds of things can you eat? Like here's what's on the menu for Christmas dinner. So I want to make sure that there's something here for you and that you feel okay, like being able to eat what you want to eat. And so having that reaction is also really awesome because my mother-in-law especially has been just this like great advocate for me. Like anytime we go out to eat or anytime we're doing like some activity with the family or if we're getting together for the holidays, like she's always the first one to say like, what can I do to make sure that you're comfortable and without that like judgy kind of tone or that feeling of like, I'm going to accommodate for you and make you feel special and like you can have your little meal over there.
Making you feel like you're an inconvenience or something like that. She doesn't do that. She includes you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that has always been really great for me. And I feel really lucky in that way, but I know not everybody has that support and not everybody has that family that will take care of them in that way and that can kind of have the context of what having diabetes is like. So I know that that's a really hard situation to be in because a lot of times questions that people might ask you may feel judgmental. Like it may feel like they are just trying to like get under your skin or they're trying to be nosy about your health or they're just like, wanting to like poke and prod and like just judge, I guess, is I think where most people come from it with. Yeah. And I think that the way that I started to look at it was it comes from a place of caring and curiosity. And when somebody cares and they're curious about you, they're taking a deep interest in what you're doing and how you're doing. And sometimes it's hard to see that as something that's productive. But when you look at it from that perspective and you kind of understand, like, okay, they may not be judging. Like, some people will be, but some people won't be. And so the questions that they ask you are just an opportunity for you to let them in more and to let them know what you're going through. And it helps them understand. And eventually those questions kind of just go away and that curiosity is satisfied. And then you're just living life with that person.
So is that something you've seen happen with your friend group where maybe they didn't have quite as much of a connection to diabetes and understanding, how that dynamic happens? Have you seen growth in that friend group and those questions have kind of dropped off over time?
Oh yeah. Like I think initially, probably in like the first year, they were on me like every time. They were like, okay, well, what about this? Or like if I had to take insulin in public because like maybe I wasn't at home, they were like, okay, why do you have to do that? And how can you do that? Those are needles. Like, those things that people are like, what? You do that every day? And so it was letting them know, well, okay, this is why I take insulin and this is why I have to take this particular insulin at this time, while we're at the table. And this is why I won't go to the bathroom to do it, and kind of like giving them the overall context of how I was living and like why I was doing certain things. And then over time, it's like second nature to them. Like when I scan my Freestyle Libre, before we have drinks, or if at this point, not now, but like if we go out to eat, or, if we are out and I'm like, oh crap, it's time for me to take my insulin and I'm not at home, I have it with me. They're all like, do what you got to do. And there's not a second question about it. And I think it's because they ask so many questions ahead of time. And I explained them like very rationally and calmly to them and kind of compared it to things that they could understand. It helped them to grasp onto it. And now it's not like, oh, Mila has to do this diabetes thing. It's like, oh, this is part of her life. And like, let's take the 5 seconds to pause so that like she can take care of it. And then we'll get on with what we're doing. So it's really cool to have that shift. And I think it's just all about how I explained it to them. And I tried to like be very simple about it and use simple terms and just explain kind of the overall like benefits to me of why this works and like why I have to manage in this way. And that has really helped them grasp an understanding. And it's really funny because they're my allies too, even though none of them like have diabetes or have a connection to diabetes except for me. And so they've always got my back, or they always, like, it's just really cool to see them be so supportive, and they can even explain things to people now. Like, if I get like a diet soda at a restaurant or something, and like we're with another friend that doesn't get it, and they're like, well, why are you drinking a diet soda? Just drink a regular one. And a friend can chime in and say like, oh no, if she drinks a regular soda, her blood sugar will be high. It'll stay high. It'll be a whole mess for her. And it's really funny that like, I don't have to answer those questions anymore because they have it. And they're so kind of like ingrained in my life that they're just like, oh no, I got this. I'll talk to them about this.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes, you are very fortunate. Up next, Mila's takeaway of the day for you.
Takeaway of the day: turning your information into action.
So my last question for you is, for someone that's considering putting themselves out there, maybe they're thinking about getting a Twitter account, maybe they're thinking about starting a blog, maybe they're just thinking about talking to friends and family about actually having diabetes. What would you say to them if they're afraid about the bullying piece?
It's always going to be a concern. Like, no matter what kind of diabetes you have, people have some kind of perception about it. And whether it's a true perception or whether it is just something that doesn't make sense and is not at all the reality of having diabetes, there's always going to be an opinion. And there's always going to be an opinion about everything. Like, I was joking the other day that like Chrissy Teigen is like a beautiful model who she's just gorgeous. She's funny. She's awesome. And people still find some reason in some way to like insult her or to like say that she's not beautiful, or say that like she posted like a like bikini photo the other day, and somebody told her she was shaped like SpongeBob SquarePants. And I was like, oh my God, like she's a model. Like she's like literally like perfection. And like, if you can find something bad to say about her, you could probably find something bad to say about anything. So I think like people will just find something because it's the internet, and that's kind of the nature of the life we live in that space. But I think if someone's afraid to start something, like whether it's like a Twitter account that talks about their like road with diabetes, or an Instagram, or they decide to start a blog, I would say just do it, and do it for you and not for anybody else. Because I think the moment that you do it for anyone else's, I don't know, like anybody else's judgment or acceptance, or like if your sole purpose is to get a reaction from someone, you're probably never going to get the reaction that you want. And so you find a way to do it for you. And I think that's what I've always stuck by, is if every single person that followed me on social media or followed my blog vanished tomorrow, I still would be happy, because I have something that nobody else can take from me. Like, it's something that's completely mine. It's something that I write for myself. It's when I write an article, it's usually because it's about my own curiosity about something. Or it's like something that I want to share, to say like, oh, hey, I, created this really great recipe. I noticed that it didn't spike my blood sugar, so maybe it's something you'd be interested in too. And that fulfills me enough. Like, just doing it for myself fulfills me enough. And the bonus, the icing on the cake, so to speak, is the people who latch onto that and who say, this has helped me. And, this is something that I read, and something that I watch, and something that I really like and appreciate. And that is a little bit of fuel. But at the end of the day, when I write something, it's because it's something that I want to write and something that I want to do. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, and to just remember that if you do it for you, you'll never be disappointed. And you'll always get those people who are going to chime in their 2 cents just because they can, and they have a keyboard and they can find you. But I think at the end of the day, like, if you do it for you, you'll always be happy with it.
That is well said. I think that is, I actually wrote that down to put it on my wall. Because I think that's very true, that you really have to end up doing what's right for you and what's going to work for you. And how people respond to that's their decision, and that's their option.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there any other message, feedback, anything else that you want to drive home about this topic, diabetes bullies?
I think that it's really just remembering that it's not you. Like 99% of the time, it's not about you. It's about the other person on the other end. And the best thing that you can do is to just educate them in the way that you know how, and then leave it. Because people definitely thrive for that fight online sometimes. And so just don't give it to them. Like, use your valuable time to take care of you.
Well said. Thank you so much, Mila, for being on, and congrats on all your amazing successes. You've really taken type 2 diabetes and put yourself out there, and you've really turned it into something way bigger than probably you ever even imagined it would be. So congrats on all of your successes, and thank you for taking time out to talk about this.
Thank you. I so appreciate you having me on.
Big shout out and thanks to Mila for letting me snag her off of her busy schedule and chat about her diabetes experiences. Next week is about the data on diabetes complications risk. I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to talk about, if you put a group of people with diabetes together, how many of those people end up developing complications of diabetes? Because I would almost bet that you overestimate your risk, and you probably underestimate your ability to decrease that risk. So next week is all about the data on diabetes complications. And until then, don't forget, the number one thing you can do to manage your diabetes is bet on you.
Keep current on new episodes by subscribing to Type 2 and You with Meg. Be sure to share a link of today's episode to someone you know living with type 2 diabetes. Want to learn more about today's topic or need answers to your diabetes dilemmas? Contact Megan by using the links in the podcast description or visiting her webpage, type2andyou.org. This podcast is for informational purposes only and not intended as medical advice.